They came from my truck, and the silence I moved out here to find suddenly sounded like a countdown. I mean that. The woods had this way of holding its breath, and one morning that stillness broke not with a bird or a breeze, but with the roll of a vehicle down our private lane, deliberate and wrong, like someone announcing they own the place. I'm Jack Nolan, and for as long as I can remember, my pickup has been the thing that anchored me. It's older than my last relationship and cleaner than my conscience most Saturdays, and nowhere on earth did I expect a group of self-appointed enforcers to try and take it from me. Laura and I bought 5 acres on the edge of Cedar Ridge because we wanted space, not because we wanted drama. She'd been in the bureau for 15 years, the kind of operator who plans for Plan B and sleeps with a pin under her pillow because you never know when a signature will save a life. I, on the other hand, know the exact place every dent belongs on that old F-350 and how a truck should feel when you start it up on a cold morning. We wanted a place where the grass could grow on its own schedule, and the nearest HOA notice was a rumor from town. We got exactly that, up until the day the tidy suburban kingdom next door decided our truck undermined their carefully curated image of perfection. Cedar Ridge is one of those developments with hedges cut to military precision and houses painted in a color palette approved by a committee whose members think beige is a personality. We were technically outside their jurisdiction, the county line running through an old oak, but when you put a wild patch of property next to a manicured mall of lawns, people notice the difference, and some people hate it. They noticed us the moment we put out a wheelbarrow and a mailbox that didn't match a handbook. At first it was looks that lingered too long, then a welcome visit from Carol Hargrove, the HOA president, clipboard in hand, and a smile so perfect it had its own warranty. She came over the first week with a pie and a way of looking at us like we'd brought sand to the beach. "Welcome to the subdivision," she said, but the slogan she actually meant was, "Welcome, now start behaving properly." Laura made coffee and offered a slice. Carol declined like someone refusing to soil a new napkin. She admired the farm-to-table aesthetic from the porch, then leaned forward and said, "You realize that vehicle in your driveway is inconsistent with community standards." She didn't say it like a question. We laughed about it that night over dinner, because laughing at petty things is cheaper than losing your temper. But Carol was efficient. If vindictive people had a personification, she was it. Letters arrived, and signed and formal, tucked under our door like legal sermons. "Please bring your vehicle into compliance." The font on the notices suggested they were trying to look official. The reality was more pathetic. They printed county seals they didn't have the right to use and stapled them onto stationer paper that smudged when touched. Still, the intent was clear. The truck was the symbol, and she wanted us to swap it out for something bland. Then someone shattered the silence for real. One afternoon as Laura was on a run and I was rinsing the bed of the truck after hauling gravel, a dark SUV rolled up our lane. 4 men climbed out in matching navy shirts that had Cedar Ridge compliance, ironed on like it meant something. They had decrees in their hands and a tacit assumption that a life carefully administered by committee belongs to anyone with an ink-stamped authority complex. Their leader, broad-shouldered, chin like a misplaced elbow, stomped forward and announced, "We're here to impound that vehicle for noncompliance." I stood there with a hose over my shoulder wondering if I'd missed a memo. "You don't have jurisdiction," I said, which is bureaucratic code for "get off my property." One of the men shoved a laminated card toward me like it was a sword. It was, in fact, a badge sticker you could buy online. The sound of it hitting my palm was the sound a lot of bad decisions make just before they go wrong. Laura came jogging down the drive, ponytail windblown, earbuds in like she thought she was returning to a scene of domestic normal. When she saw the men, something changed in her face. She doesn't get riled often. Her job taught her to be the cold, steady kind of calm you need when trains are getting hit by hurricanes. But she also gets real hot about one thing: people impersonating authority to bully other people. In 2 strides, she was beside me, and whatever lightness I had left dissolved into the earth. "You have no authority here," she told them, voice soft but precise, like the click a pistol makes when someone finally acknowledges it. They miscalculated. They'd come looking for leverage and found the opposite. The leader's jaw tightened and he barked something about community standards. And then, because bullies double down when faced with a better bully, he reached for his baton. His hand was too slow. Laura's was faster. In the span of an instant, she'd disarmed the man, twisted his wrist, used his momentum to put him on the gravel like she was folding a map, and yanked a bundle of zip ties from his belt. It was a clean, almost clinical takedown. The other men scrambled and underestimated her until they didn't, and within moments their bravado flattened into surprise as she bound them with the same zip ties they'd brought for us. She called law enforcement like a pro and then walked around cataloging everything like a prosecutor taking inventory of a wrong that had finally been named. Cameras she'd disabled, badges she'd stripped from necks like peeling a sticker off a wall. She took a breath, looked over at me, and said, "They thought they could scare a couple without an HOA badge." It sounds small when I say it now, but at that moment it was the hinge of everything that followed. The news spread like gasoline on dry grass. The sheriff came out. The men were arrested for impersonation, for attempting to detain private property, for brandishing equipment they had no license to use. The tapes Laura turned over, every camera angle, every stitch of evidence, went from our phone to the deputies, and like dominoes the county started asking questions. Who organized this compliance squad? Who authorized their presence? The fingers pointed like a map, right to Carol Hargrove's name scribbled in margins, and in a few days the tidy house with the manicured yard found itself extremely uncomfortable in front of a microphone. I'll admit I felt a thrill watching the veneer crack. For months, Carol had been the sort of person who used small rules to feel large. The perfect manicure, the perfect posture, the perfect list of restrictions she could fling at anyone who dared be a little different. But when authority overstepped into impersonation and coercion, the legal world noticed, and once legal noticed, the stage shifted. People who once flinched when Carol cleared her throat started showing up at county hearings. The HOA board started to splinter when subpoenas arrived with their signatures. That's the clean version of events. The messy version is all the scare tactics that followed. After Carol's little squad was hauled away, notices started arriving in our mailbox again, but this time the tone had darkened. Someone slashed our tires at 2 in the morning. The neat little spiral grooves in the rubber told us they knew what they were doing. Someone egged the truck and wrote, "Out," on the tailgate. Then there were nighttime visitors who aimed flashlights at our windows, silhouettes that said, "We're watching." The county was investigating, but investigations take time. In the meantime, we had to live with being the target. That pressure is what turned Laura from defender to strategist. She began methodically building a bedrock of proof. Timestamps, camera footage, witnesses, and the kind of organized patience that bores through the messy layers of this kind of abuse. She cataloged every fake notice, photographed every forged seeming seal, recorded the men who'd come out of the SUV and their interactions with Carol at HOA meetings. It felt like watching an architect plan a house whose foundation would put a boogeyman out of work. Carol didn't go down without trying to be clever. She called a meeting and invited residents to discuss community safety, slipping in the idea of an authorized enforcement and compliance unit. She spoke about property values, about children's safety, about a need for uniform standards. It sounded reasonable until you peeled back the words and found the animus, the idea that a few people could decide who belonged and who didn't. Laura and I weren't members of the HOA. We had no vote. Carol wanted to extend her reach, and she had the charisma to sell it to people who liked knowing someone was in charge. But charisma can't hold up against facts, and that's where Laura's evidence came in. The sheriff's office called and said they had enough to take a hard look at Carol's role. We handed over emails, bank records, and the sequences of calls that showed how the faux compliance team had been assembled. Laura even unearthed invoices from a small, chartered security company that had a pattern of doing work for the HOA, work that financially benefited members of the board. Conflict of interest you could fold like origami into public records. When the county attorney subpoenaed the HOA's internal communications, the cracks opened wide. The board had minutes that read like a campaign, with line items for buy equipment, train volunteers, and a suspiciously detailed list of residents to monitor. There were receipts for cheap uniforms and phone records showing several late-night calls. It's one thing to worry about mailbox colors. It's another to use secrecy to create fear and mobilize muscle under the guise of community service. Once people saw the documents, and once neighbors realized their dues were being used to fund what looked like a private militia, public sentiment shifted faster than a summer storm. Carol's supporters tried the old playbook, shame and then silence. She launched defamation threats and demanded apologies. She painted us as the aggressive newcomers, as the ones who hadn't respected community norms. The irony was almost laughable. The woman who'd trespassed into our property multiple times accused us of disrespect. But once the press smelled the story, irony took a back seat to scrutiny. Reporters showed up at HOA meetings with cameras and questions that wouldn't fit in any of Carol's prepared answers. People who'd followed her because they were afraid of being next found themselves suddenly siding with us not because they loved the truck, but because they didn't want to live under someone else's private martial law. As the legal net tightened, Carol got desperate. She tried to sue us for reckless endangerment, for allowing our dog to bark, for the way our gravel driveway threw dust up onto the road. Nothing stuck against the mountain of evidence Laura had assembled. But desperation changes people. It doesn't disappear. She began to threaten neighbors who testified, called up donors, and tried to convince them the cost of exposing her was too high. She mobilized more people to her cause. It was ugly. It was mean. It was everything a person could do when the scaffolding of their identity starts to wobble. One night, the fight turned physical in a way I never wanted to normalize. Someone drove through our gate at 4 a.m. and rammed the front of the truck with a pickup. They left tracks and a note that said, plain as day, "Go back to the city." My hands shook when I called the sheriff. You don't want your home to become a battleground, but sometimes there's no choice. Laura barely flinched. She archived the video, logged the plate, and told me to breathe. I tried to do what she said. Breathe. What I learned over the next months was simple and terrifying. When people have a lot to lose, houses, investments, reputations, they rationalize almost anything to protect that loss. Carol had convinced herself she was preserving property values when in fact, she'd been inflating her own personhood with other people's fear. That's a dangerous cocktail: ego, money, and a sense of entitlement, and it's well-stocked in suburbia. The county handed down a settlement offer at one point, an attempt to smooth the legal mess into something both sides could live with. Carol wanted to rebrand the HOA, to apologize in a letter that would read like an edited confession. We were offered money, an admission of sorts, but most importantly, a promise that the HOA would disband its enforcement unit and undergo governance reforms. I stared at the proposed language and thought of all the nights Laura had sat at the kitchen table, compiling evidence, refusing to let fear put us in the passenger seat. We agreed, but not because we were tired of fighting, because sometimes a fight is about setting a precedent, not just winning a skirmish. The settlement was an odd victory. Carol's power was diminished, but not erased. The board members left in a hurry. Some moved away, embarrassed. Others stayed and tried to run the machine more carefully. The compliance shirts disappeared. The decals peeled off the SUVs like gulls shedding feathers. People started to attend HOA meetings not to bow, but to ask questions, and that by itself felt revolutionary. What hit me hardest in the fallout wasn't the legal success or the way local news made our story into a cautionary tale. It was the small, human stuff. Neighbors bringing us casseroles, Mrs. Delgado from 2 doors down dropping off a lemon pie with a note that said, "Thanks for standing up," a postcard from a friend who said she'd never known she'd live to see a homeowners association get taken to task by its own rules. It was the way Laura and I would sit on the porch and laugh at something stupid and realize how loud that laugh used to be before fear crept into our bones. We kept the truck. Its dents are deeper now, each one a line of the story we told. We drive it on Sunday mornings to the farmer's market, and folks wave at us now in a way that's shy and real. The nights aren't perfect. Every now and again someone will shout from a car on the main road or a hand will flick us a dirty look, but the system that tried to bully us is quieter. Quiet, not gone. There's a last part to all of this that I want to leave you with, because the thing about watching authority be weaponized is you learn the value of paying attention. If an HOA seems a little too interested in uniformity, if a neighbor starts talking about preserving values while someone else disappears from block social life, watch the finances, listen to the minutes, and ask where the power is going. Systems don't sleep. Bullies find ways to dress up as committees and councils. And those who try to guard a neighborhood by fencing it in will sometimes forget they're meant to guard people, not their own egos. Laura sometimes says the most dangerous thing isn't violence. It's the slow, quiet erosion of consent. The way people accept small humiliations to keep the peace, the the way rules can be used to reinvent obedience. I think about that when I wash the truck and the suds slide over the scratches and the scars. I think of Carol and her clipboards, trying to make the world bow to a straight edge. And I think of the men in navy shirts who mistook uniforms for power. And I think of the quiet that used to feel like freedom, now filled with the knowledge that freedom sometimes needs defending. We didn't set out to be warriors. We wanted a place where we could sleep without wondering if the next knock on the door would be a fine or a summons. Instead, we learned how to name wrongs, to gather evidence, and to turn a community's eyes back toward its leaders. If anything, this is the part of the story I want people to hear. It's easier to walk past injustice when it's not your name on the line, but the cost of looking away is paid in small insurances and silence people until one day the price is much higher. If you're comfortable with what your neighborhood says is okay, great. If you're not, then maybe the best defense is a clean truck, an open camera, and a partner who doesn't flinch. So tell me, what would you have done when those men showed up at your driveway? Would you have taken a stand or made a call? Do you think associations gone unchecked can become dangerous? Or was Carol just a rotten apple? Drop a comment, tell your story, and if you've ever had an encounter with people who thought they had authority they didn't earn, share what happened. Because the more we talk about it, the less likely it is that anyone gets to weaponize community standards as an excuse to hurt a neighbor. If you like this tale, hit subscribe, but more importantly, look after each other out there. Silence might be beautiful, but sometimes it needs our voice.